Sam asked me a number of points, about whether or not.
Okay, just so you know, he's starting to roll, so you can finish your thought and then I'll start asking you.
Sure. She asked whether or not people were getting into this, mostly because of the economic situation. I see two other things at work. One, we have the internet, which allows us a level of communication globally unprecedented in human history. And although I can't categorically state the following has never happened, it's clearly happening now. People are developing a sense of spiritual consciousness. And when you start looking in your heart and you see that the law is commanding you to be loving, compassionate, and truthful, and then the government agent comes to you and say, you must do this, and you ask them why, and the only thing they can come up with is because I said so, or I'm telling you to. It doesn't work with adults anymore. And that's the big problem I see, a confluence of these three things coming together. And a lot of people are waking up to our financial system is essentially a scam. If you were to look at, say, banking, right now you go to a bank, you want to get a loan, they don't loan you money, you loan them a promissory note. They then monetize this and give you the money. Now let's suppose that instead of a promissory note, which is a species of money, it has value itself. Imagine you went there with an ounce of gold and you said, I want to get some money and here's my collateral. They take that gold, they sell it on the market, they take a picture of it, and then when after you've paid off, you go back and you say, I want my gold back. All they have is a picture of your ounce of gold, and they say, here it is. So they're essentially taking our promissory notes, putting them out on the international market, selling it, and there is very little evidence that they're suffering any sort of loss at all. And if people recognize that that promissory note had value, just like gold, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Okay, let me back up a little.
Okay.
Okay, so when we talk to people about Freeman philosophy, sometimes people who do know about it will say to us, oh, I've heard of him. But there aren't that many of them in Canada. It's just a fringe movement. It's not that big a deal. Are they wrong?
I don't know. I believe that we're actually global in nature. It's the World Freeman Society. We're in Australia, New Zealand, all over England, all over Canada and the States. There are chapters in South America or South Africa. We have chapters in Holland and Germany and starting up in France. So, I mean, it might be, I think people call it a fringe just to try to brush it off and to pigeonhole it so that they can ignore it. I think we're looking at a growth factor that once you reach critical mass, it's very quick. And I would agree with that 5 years ago. Now I think it's getting big. You will find very few police officers who are unaware of this information. You will find very few judges who are unaware of this information of our positions.
So how big a deal is it in Canada, do you figure? Do you have any way of quantifying it?
Not really. We've got members, and but I'm not the administrator for that, so I don't really know. But I'd be willing to bet upwards of 20 to 30,000 people have served notices on the government, establishing lawful excuse to disobey by way of serving a claim of right.
Okay, so back up for me. When you say serve, I've heard of this before. When you say serve notice on the government, so that means literally writing a letter.
Yes, it's in my research I found by reading the Criminal Code of Canada that we do have the right to establish lawful excuse to disobey the government and the people in the government if we're operating upon a claim of right. So what we do is we serve a notice of understanding and intent and a claim of right. We express our understanding, we express our intent, and the goal with this is to establish discussion so that we can avoid conflict, and then we claim our right to engage in a course of action which otherwise could land us in a bit of trouble.
Can you give me an example, like a real-world example?
The right to travel incident, let's say. Now, I know a lot of people, they operate with fear and they don't want unlicensed drivers on the road. But when you look at the license or the act under which you applied for your license, I'm assuming you have a license. Did you read the Motor Vehicle Act or the Highway Traffic Act before or after you got your license, or like most people, you never even read it? You'd be hard-pressed to find in that act anywhere where your previously existing right to engage to travel privately on the highways was removed.
So you're saying you don't need a driver's license?
If all you're doing is engaging in travel, you're going from point A to point B, and you are not engaging in commerce on the highway, that's public roads, it's public highway, and no, you do not need a license to do it.
Do you need a license plate?
You need, if you're operating without a license plate, they would have color of right to pull you over because they could claim that it's been stolen or whatnot. So you operate on a claim of right, you put an identifying plate on it, you express that it's private property, and then the police have no right to pull you over. And this doesn't mean you can just go willy-nilly on the road and you can't follow or you can disobey the rules of the road that everyone else is expecting. It doesn't mean you can operate in a manner that is dangerous or will distress other people. But no, we don't need our servants' permission to use the public commons for lawful reasons, and traveling is a lawful reason. And there's nothing in the Act which removes clearly and specifically that previously existing right.
So just so I'm clear. So what I might think of as driving,
Right.
getting behind the wheel, turning it on and getting onto roads, you might call traveling.
I would call that traveling if I'm not engaging in commerce.
Okay. So in order to do that, you say you don't need a license. And when you talk about an identifying marker on car, it doesn't sound like you're necessarily talking about a registered Ontario, for example, license plate.
No.
You're saying you don't really need a registered license plate.
No. One of the tricks, my first book that I wrote was called Registration Application Submission Means Drop and Bend Over and Don't Expect Lube, How the Government Really Gains Power. I was a little bit angry and big on long descriptive titles. What I found out, registration, when you register anything from your car, your property, your children, essentially what you're doing is you're signing it over to the keeper, to the registrar, and then they let you have use of it under their terms and conditions.
But are people going to get in some serious trouble if you say to them, you don't need a license plate and you don't need a license? I mean, isn't that an invitation to end up in court or jail?
It's not really an invitation to just run out and operate in an immature fashion, because it does require people to study the law and understand what's going on and operate on the claim of right. But across the country, I've got emails from hundreds of people who are doing it, and the police don't do anything as long as you're just staying with the flow of traffic and you're not, racing or doing stunting or anything crazy.
What's the advantage of not putting a license plate on your car or not having a driver's license? What do you get at
I
it?
think it's empowerment. I think people look at the existing acts, they're asking questions. The government or the people in the government just say that's the way it is, you have to do it, take it up with the judge. And they're starting to recognize that there's a great deal of deception relied on by the government. And we want our country back. We see that they're relying on this deception. And so it's people just exercising their rights. And to ask, what is the benefit of this right? It's a right. And who knows how important it might be in the future, where I don't know, years and years ago, people would get on the highway and they would travel and they didn't have to go ask permission to do it. And people are getting tired of a government that treats us like children. They claim to be public servants, but then they're acting like the nanny and forcing us to ask them permission in order to secure rights which our grandparents exercised without thought.
So, okay, so I understand on the car front, but when we first started talking, we talked about the economy being sort of an incentive for people who are taking this side. Explain to me why.
Well, it's human nature. I think people will very rarely look into issues like this unless they do become uncomfortable. I mean, it's a sad fact of human nature that they don't really care about injustice unless they're aware of it and it affects them. And because of the economy, people who otherwise would just look at us like a fringe group are starting to be affected, and they are starting to wonder what's going on here. I mean, we have tradesmen who want to work, we have people who want to hire them, but the only thing lacking is the tool necessary for us to engage in order to engage in exchange and commerce. And the reason is because our money supply is being drained from us, and the government is not fulfilling its function to put money in circulation without interest attached.
So how, so are you saying that the worse the economy becomes, the bigger the membership of the Freeman Society becomes?
I don't know. I think that would be part of it, but I also don't think that's the only thing that's required. I think a lot of the most of the freemen I meet, it's not because they want more money, it's because they want greater control in their own life to follow their own conscience. And when the government tells us that we can't do something which we know is right and proper and just because they're not making money out of it, that's when people start rejecting the concept of governance. Essentially, my father was a World War II veteran. And when I asked him about this situation, he told me this is not what we were fighting for. I love Canada, I love my country, I love the concepts upon which it was founded. What I don't like is what's become of it, where the corporations seem to have hijacked our government and our courts, and people are operating now, peace officers are operating now for revenue, essentially. They're enforcing policies that go against our hearts. What we have is the greatest tool ever devised to peacefully ensure full and complete government accountability. If we can just say no to the people in the government, then that is all we have to do. We don't need revolution, we don't need violence, we don't need anything like that. All we have to do is say, sorry, my heart tells me what you want me to do is wrong.
Does that include not paying taxes?
I believe in that we should pay taxes to a certain degree. I believe that we should have a say in how they're spent. I don't believe deception should be used for them, and I don't believe our money should be flowing out of the country to foreign bankers because we've put money in circulation with interest attached. I think we should have a say in where our tax dollars go, and I think you would be hard-pressed to find any Canadian who wanted their tax dollars spent on bombs, dropping them on people in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or any other state.
I certainly understand what your point is clear, but what I'm still trying to understand is when you say it's important to say no to governments, that sounds like it's important to say no, I'm not going to pay that tax bill that I just got.
What I found is doing my research in it, because again, everyone has a social insurance number pretty much. They tell you you need this number in order to work legally in Canada. What they don't tell you, I work lawfully within Canada, the geographical area. I engage in private two-party contracts, and I'm not making income. What most people don't realize is your social insurance number identifies you as an employee of the federal government. They call it a federal employee identification number. You need it to pay into things like Canada Pension Plan. The courts have ruled that a pension is prima facie evidence of an employee relationship. It used to be called unemployment insurance. Now it's called employment insurance because they ensure you're always employed. Because you have this number, now you have an obligation to pay income tax on any money that comes in. It's kind of like a day job kind of thing where you go for temporary jobs, but because you're working through them, providing a service as an agent for that agency, you have to give them a cut. It's pretty much the same thing with Canada. They don't tell you that the Canada you're working legally within is not the geographical area, but a legal entity. And we have no obligation to have a SIN. We have no obligation to operate as their employee. Because I don't have one, I can't collect welfare or unemployment or the Canada pension. But nor am I now bound by the rules which do bind employees of the federal government. Because I've given up the benefits, I don't have the burdens. But most people are completely unaware of the fact that they're operating under a contract for service. They're first and foremost an employee of the federal government operating under that contract for service, and therefore they have to give some back. But we're not obliged.
So what I hear you saying is that if you don't have a social insurance number, then you're not obliged to pay taxes.
If you ask CRA what your account number is, they will give you your social insurance number. Because we have the right of association, I've chosen to exercise that right. I'm not associated with any social insurance number, and therefore I simply don't have an account with CRA.
Do you have a health card?
Nope. No, when I did my claim of right, I was in BC, and what I told them, because of consumption taxes, very difficult to get away from those. I mean, GST, PST, and things like that. So what I claimed, instead of trying to get an exemption and fight about it, we said, listen, take that money and put it towards any healthcare costs that I might have. And bear in mind, we have a right to healthcare as it is. There's really no reason for us to be paying for insurance for healthcare when the government has the power just to print up the money as it's needed for these. Instead of going to, the Rothschilds and asking them to borrow some money, which we then have to pay back with interest and tax. We should just be creating it, putting it into circulation. And I had need to use the health services in BC when I broke my elbow, and they fixed it for me, and then I asked them for a bill. Just give me a signed bill and I'd pay it, because it was my own stupidity. I figured I'm liable for this. And they looked into the records and they said, no, Mr. Menard, you're fine, you're covered. We don't want any money, and no one wanted to present me a bill. No one wanted to put their signature on a piece of paper and demand payment.
And yet you don't pay tax.
Well, I pay
Or do
consumption
you?
taxes, but I don't really call it a tax. I don't pay income tax. I have no obligation to pay income tax. And what most people fail to realize is when you work and you get paid a wage, that's not even really income. Income is if you have, say, money and you invest it and you get interest on it. That's income. That I think people should pay interest on. But if you go out and you are engaging in a trade or anything like this, that money you receive is not income. It's not really taxable.
What's your stance on mortgages?
I think it's the biggest scam this planet has ever seen. I mean, we have the land, we have the people who want to work, we have the need for it, and instead of just working together and building up our communities and having the government create the money we need for that so that we can engage in fair exchange, we have to go run to the banks. There's a reason they're making billions of dollars of profit per quarter while other people are struggling on the street. Essentially, when you go, if you look at their documents that they send people, mortgagees, it says your loan, your loan. These are made by lawyers. They know exactly what they're talking about. A loan is either a noun or a verb. When they say your loan, they're referring to your actions. Essentially what happens, we go to a bank and it's not the bank lending us money, it's us lending them a promissory note, which is a species of money. They then take it, sell it on the market, they get paid that way. Now they also demand money from us and then insurance or interest as well. And then when we're all done, they don't give us back our note because they've already sold it. The deception would be very, very clear if people, instead of thinking about a promissory note that they signed to get the money, they walked into a bank with a chunk of gold and said, here's my chunk of gold, give me some money so that I can go pay and build my house. Then what they do is they sell that gold on the market, they demand that you pay them back for the money that they gave you, and then when it's time for you to get your gold back, they give you a picture of the gold that they had.
So what does somebody do who's, in your estimation, someone who is maybe having some financial times, has become interested in the Freeman philosophy, and has a big mortgage and a big tax bill? What do they do? I mean, within the Freeman philosophy...
Step one is educate yourself. Step one, don't listen to me, don't take my word for it. Educate yourself, do your own due diligence. What I generally do is I instruct people or advise people or suggest that they do LSATs, law school admission tests. They study those, do one a day for 30 days, and then when you read these acts, you'll be able to actually understand it. Otherwise, it looks like it's legalese. It's not even French, it's not even English, and it's a highly technical, very precise language. And in order to understand it, we need to educate ourselves.
Based on your understanding of the law, is it necessary to pay a mortgage, or can you get away with not paying?
If the bank has not suffered a loss, then you don't owe them anything. If they have suffered a loss and they can prove it, then yes, I think you should pay.
What does that mean if there's some?
Well, if you come to me with an ounce of gold, and I say, okay, I'm going to hold on to this gold, and I'm going to give you $1,000, and you say fine, and then I take this ounce of gold and I sell it, and now I've got my $1,000 back. I've never suffered a loss.
But if someone has a $100,000 mortgage at a bank and says, these payments are very difficult for me, I'm just trying to get, I know what you're saying about gold, but
Imagine for a moment, like CBC, it's a pretty big corporation. When they receive a demand for payment, they don't just automatically pay. If they did that, whoever put out the money would get fired. They go through a proper administrative process where they say, okay, I understand that you've served me with an invoice or a bill, some form of demand for payment. I would do a conditional acceptance and I'm willing to pay, but I need to see a contract and performance of that contract. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired for giving you CBC's money. I can't just give it to people who just demand it. People are doing the same thing with the banks and saying, okay, I understand that you claim I owe you money, but I want to see the original document that I signed. I want to see that promissory note. And if the bank has sold it already on the market, they've got nothing. They've given up whatever it was that gave them the power to demand the payment.
Does this actually work?
Oh, yeah.
To say I'm not going to pay my mortgage?
It's not, I'm not going to pay. It's, I will pay if you can prove certain things. So you accept their demand to pay, but upon conditions and upon them proving that their demand is in fact lawful.
And does it actually work to, by not having a social insurance number, not be required to pay taxes? Does that work?
You mean income tax?
Income tax.
If you don't have a social insurance number, you do not have an account with CRA, and if you don't have an account with them, they don't want anything to do with you.
But most people get a social insurance number very early in life.
We have a right of association, and we can change our associations at any time. And this came to, I was helping a guy with CRA, and they tried to tell me that I had an account with them. I said, no, I don't. And we tested it. Let's see, is there a social insurance number associated with it? They said, yes. I said, well, that settles it. I'm not associated with any sin. And they said, well, yes, you are. I said, no, I'm not. They said, yes, you are. I said, let's prove it then. Let's take it to court and decide whether or not I have the right to decide whether or not I'm associated with a number or not. They didn't want anything to do with that. Because, of course, I'm sure the courts would side with us. There's a reason that we have a sin through submission of an application for it. They don't just assign it at birth. It's a choice.
So this works.
Yeah, I found it works. And more than that, it works if you have the proper intent. If you're just looking to get rich off of it, good luck. They're going to recognize that. They're going to come down on you. If you're doing it because you are, in fact, motivated by love and you're guided by peace and you're trying to build a better country, then yeah, you've got some good intent, you've got some good motivation, you will be able to overcome. They do test you. They will come and try to test you and test your knowledge. So you can't just rattle it off. It's not like getting a license like we're used to, where we just flash it, oh, I've got it, you can't touch me now. But it does work, because when it all boils down to it, we're all human beings on this planet. It's a common law jurisdiction. The people in the government are bound by the law. The rule of law recognizes that equality is paramount and mandatory. The only form of government recognized as lawful is representative, and representation requires mutual consent. So we can, one-on-one, just revoke our consent and say, I don't consent to you dropping bombs on these people anymore, and I don't want you to do it with my money. So no, I'm not a member of your body politic.
So here's where I get a little confused, though, because the Department of Finance has said very clearly, as has CRA, that there are all sorts of schemes like this, as they refer to it, that are myths, and they do not work.
Well, you would have to explain that to the thousands of people who have successfully discharged their student loans by looking and reading the Act and seeing the fact that within the Act under which they applied for their loan, there's a section which very clearly speaks about discharging your loan using set-off or deduction. CRA will take money if they owe it to you and you owe student loan. They will take that money and use that section to pay off your student loan. But we also own a portion of this country, we own resources, and we have a right to access those resources to pay it. We're not saying, I'm not paying my loan. I'm saying, go here to this account I had no idea about and grab it from there and pay it.
Okay, that's an interesting point. You're talking about the birth certificate to these ends, so we've got one here. Okay, because I genuinely don't understand. Forgive me, but I blocked, just for TV, I blocked everything.
No, fair enough.
Nobody needs to know.
No. You should also block out that number there.
Okay, people do. Sorry,
This number right here, what I believe and what makes sense to me, and the reason it makes sense to me, if there isn't something like this in place, then the people who are extracting the resources of this country, which belong to all of us, are committing theft. If this system is in place, then they're operating under trust law, and it makes sense. This birth certificate evidences that you were born not only in Manitoba, but that there is a trust relationship. If you wanted to replace this, you have to go to statistics or the issuing party, and they look on their documents. They look in their file and their documents, and they say, yes, there are documents here which support us giving you this. This actually evidences that there is a stock certificate, a security, if you would, a security evidencing your ownership in the country. Someone else is holding it in trust. Now, when you look at the law, if you had stock in, say, Microsoft, and you were leaving the country, you could leave that stock with me in trust. I would now be the stockholder. You're still the owner. Because I'm the holder, the dividends would flow to me, and trust law would say that I have an obligation to spend it in your best interest. It would also mean that when it comes time to vote on anything within that, I have the voting power, I have your proxy. But when you come and you redeem this and you say, look, give me, I don't want this, I want my stock certificate back, then I would have to return it to you.
It sounds like you're talking about these numbers here.
Yeah,
what are these numbers correspond
Well, it's funny, if you look at it, everything on here is identified as the function. Even the name, like you don't know your own name, but this one number is not identified as the function. If you look at some of the birth certificates issued in BC and Alberta and I think Saskatchewan, back when they were doing very well, you will find that this number is in green and it says revenue receipt, treasury use only. My question would be, who received what revenue, where did they receive it from, and where is it now?
So what does that number correspond to in your mind?
I would be willing to bet that that will correspond with a security, like a stock security, a stock certificate evidencing our ownership in Canada.
So it sounds like you're saying money in a bank account.
Lots of money in a bank account. When you look at our country, when you look at the resources that we have available, the number of people, the stability of our system, we're the richest country on the planet. There are oil producing countries out there where they don't try to, scam their citizens. They get paid every year. Here's $100,000. That's your share of the oil revenue. We could be doing that with our oil revenue, with our resources, with everything.
So do you think people believe or should believe that there is money owed to them that is sitting in an account that corresponds with those numbers?
Yes, pretty much. It might not be in that one account. They might put it in the consolidated revenue fund. Essentially what you do, do you have a bill? Anyone like a hydro bill? People are doing this with their hydro bills, and I can put you in contact with some people that have been quite successful with this. When you get a bill payment from Ontario Hydro, it's not actually legally a bill because no one signed it. It's an invoice, and then there's a lower portion, and it says a remittance, and they want you to return that remittance with your payment. If you look up what a remittance is, it's a species of money sent by one merchant to another. They're giving you essentially a check that you can use to access this fund, this account, to pay it off. What they want you to do is send them this remittance, but not a photocopy. They want that actual thing back, and then a check on top of it. Essentially what you've done is you've given them two payments. You've double paid. They keep that remittance. That becomes their corporate bonuses because they've been paid twice, and then they cash the check. But it's your signature upon it. What people are doing and having quite a bit of success with is they will put this registration number, they print the name in ink, and then they reference this number on the back. And then that will identify sufficient information for the person who sent the invoice and for the trustee, the Minister of Finance, to access that account and to verify that this guy does in fact have an account with them.
And so then it sounds like, again, just so we understand, you basically put these numbers down, and then the money for that hydro bill will come out of that account.
Either that or their tax liability drops by that same amount.
But bottom line, if they put this number down on their hydro bill, they don't have to then
It's a bit more
pay their hydro
complicated
bill.
than that. It's a bit more complicated than that. You have to, you write accepted for value, and that's a legal term where you're telling a third party, in this case the financial minister, Minister of Finance, or the receiver general, that between two parties you acknowledge that they provided you value in the form of the electricity. They try to make it complicated purposely, I think, because they're holding on to our money. They get to administer it. It's kind of like the nanny has charge of the cookie jar, and their hands are in it, and they don't want people to find out exactly how much money is there. But if we do this properly, people don't suffer the economic crisis that we're having, and the people in the government have less money to build bombs and go drop it on.
So basically, if is it correct to say that if people do their homework, then they have to pay less?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And how do they figure out how to do their homework? I mean, are there materials they can watch? Is there stuff they can buy?
Well, I've got 2 videos out that a lot of people start off with: Bursting Bubbles of Government Deception, and then The Magnificent Deception. They're available on YouTube or on the internet, and it explains some of the processes that the people in the government use to secure power over us. Because if you start to question these people in the government, they claim to be our servants, and yet they're commanding us and ordering us about. How does that work? The only function of law that would allow that is if we're operating within the capacity of a ward of the state or a child of the province. And because we allow that to happen, now our servants, we're not the master over them, they're master over us. And a free man is one who has recognized that this is a bit topsy-turvy, and we start claiming our power as master over our servants, and we give directives to our fiduciary agents, our trustees.
But here's where I get confused, because it sounds too good to be true.
Well, Canada sounds too good to be true. But I mean, if you've never even looked into it, if you've never read it, I mean, if you haven't educated yourself on what tools the people in the government are using to secure power, you'll never know what your remedy is. But the fact is, we own this country, we own the resources, we're a very rich country, we're very blessed, and we've been kind of hijacked by corporations that want those resources. And it's pretty much simple. Just recognize you're one of the owners of the Bank of Canada. You essentially have an account with them, and they're sending you a check, and you just fill it out like a check, and you send it off, and you draw from that for that. And the reason it's you can't do it for everything. I don't see people doing it for Corvettes or anything like that. But for things which are recognized as a human right by Canada by virtue of the fact that they're signatories to a UN covenant, that's ours. Ontario Hydro, when they access our water, that's our water. It's our hydro. And they are supposed to provide it to the people for free, and then they can sell it to the corporations. But this process won't work for a corporation, just for the living, breathing human beings.
Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so one of the Department of Finance. Okay, and I printed this because Lord knows my memory is appalling.
They're ducking and diving.
Okay, so this is a letter from the Department of Finance. Okay, just explain. Is the Department of Finance wrong, or are you?
Well, I don't know that it has to be either or, but it does say here, by submitting their birth certificates. What I've read, I read a slightly different one stating that the birth certificate, there's no funds associated with the birth certificate. But the birth certificate isn't the funds itself, and we aren't claiming that. We're claiming that the birth certificate evidences a security, and that security has the funds, but they don't tell you about that. And if it doesn't exist, then the question is, when they allow corporations to come in and seize our resources, how do they make sure that the funds that they get are being divvied up properly?
Because this appears.
Sorry.
You're right.
That's good. It's just when you had the water, it just came out. You're good.
Because this appears that the government is saying what you're selling is a scam.
Well, I think what the government is selling is the one selling the scam, because what we should do then is a full and complete forensic auditing of all of the documents that they're holding on our behalf. Let's look at those. But they don't want us to look at those, and this is why people are starting to question it. And they might call it a scam. Do they use the word scam?
No. I don't use the word scam. I call it a myth.
I don't think it's a myth if the fact, I mean, if you look on a birth certificate and it says revenue receipt, treasury use only, and then you go and you ask them who received the revenue, from whom did they receive it, and what's happened to it, and they don't tell you, they just try to brush it off like this. The questions are still outstanding, and then people start using it and they find remedy. They're getting their student loans discharged. They're paying for their hydro in this manner. So if it's a scam, why is it that they don't actually submit a signed bill? why do they send you a remittance and then acknowledge that it is in fact a valuable species of money?
I'll get a title.
And if it was a scam, I'm not making any money
Sorry,
off of
stop.
this.
Just for 1 second. I just want to know. It just slips out. It looks.
You want to title it
I'll get it after.
after?
And generally, people who are engaging in scams, they're trying to make money off of it. I'm not making any money off of this.
You don't sell any materials at all.
I have products that I've created that I've given to the World Freeman Society. They're educational packages. They're freely available online. You do not have to pay for them. But a lot of people get the information, they appreciate what we're doing, and then they buy a package after the fact, just to support us.
How much are the packages?
$200, I think. It's a series of DVDs, all my written books, a whole bunch of information that they can use to study. Again, it's freely available online. We don't withhold it if they don't have money.
Okay. You mentioned before at the beginning that you don't think that there's a police officer or judge who said in the country that doesn't know about the freedom.
I've been recognized by numerous peace officers all across the country. I know that just a few months ago there was a woman, I forget her name, but she was giving a talk to the judiciary members here in Ontario. I believe it was in Kingston, explaining the whole Freeman concept. And so many people are starting to wake up to it. One of the things that I tell people is that because it's a common law jurisdiction and we're all equal, we're seen as equal, consent is required before one man can govern another. And it was Governor McLaughlin, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, who in a talk in Vancouver back in 2006 stated that because Canada is a common law jurisdiction, equality is paramount, that no one can provide adjudication services without the consent of both members of the adjudication.
So what happens when a policeman or a police officer pulls over a freeman?
It depends. A lot of times it depends on the intent of the freeman and how much peace he has in his heart. I've heard tell of the cops just saying, oh, another woman walking away. And then I've heard tell of some freemen getting very abusive with the officer and then suffering from that. So to say what happens when that, what happens when someone gets pulled over any time, it often depends on who is getting pulled over and who's doing the pulling over.
What worries you about those circumstances when they get pulled over?
It's very powerful information, and I questioned whether or not I should be releasing this when I first came across it, because I do recognize it has there's the danger of it being abused, but I did not feel comfortable deciding who I would and who would not release it to. If it's the truth, then let the truth come out, let people see it, let them decide for themselves.
But have there been problems?
I would not say there hasn't been problems. I mean, you're dealing with people who like authority, like their authority, and who expect blind submission and obedience. And when it doesn't come, their first step is to try to secure that obedience by threats of violence. So a lot of times you end up with some of that. But in the States, some people try to claim that we're anti-government. We're not anti-government. We're pro-good government. We wish we had it. We're not associated with like the Montana Freemen, who are violent reactionaries in any way. What we're looking at using is the law to peacefully ensure a positive change.
So that's why you send the notices to the police departments, right?
Yeah, the purpose of that, the rule of law states that conflict is avoidable, unnecessary, and undesirable. We are to use discussion and negotiation to settle it, and if that doesn't work, then adjudication in a court of competent jurisdiction. So I don't tell people, don't do this, just run off and do whatever you want. I tell them, educate yourself, form your own course of action, do your own due diligence, and then go talk to these people to avoid the conflict. And there's hundreds of people out there doing it now.
Sorry, forgive me. I've been good for some years. I feel very rude interrupting your flow all the time. It just sneaks across.
I'll fix her.
Our Newfoundland friend to fix it up.
She's fixed now. It won't happen now.
Newfies are having a tough time with their fish stocks collapsing. You know what their favorite dish is now?
What's that?
And chips.
Hey, I can turn you any color, my friend. Be nice to meet you, man.
I love Newfies. You know why? You'll never meet a Newfie who can't work, can't drink, can't fight. Some of the men are just as tough.
Anytime.
Right, we're talking about the letter that gets in. I have seen one of these letters, and I brought one, right, just to make sure that this is, it's notice of understanding and intent and claim of right.
Yeah.
Does that basically sound right? Here's the sentence that bothers me as a layperson who doesn't understand this. Okay? This is the one here that talks about firearms. And I don't know, I can't read it upside down, but
Furthermore, I claim to exercise my right to possess unregistered, unlicensed firearms and ammunition and to use the same for target practice at a range or hunting for food or for protection of my flesh and blood body and all those under my immediate care, and further swear under oath never to open fire on another human unless as a last resort to protect human life or property. All he is doing is expressing the rights which already exist. He's not, I don't see anything here that is unlawful.
should that unnerve police? Because police do seem to be unnerved by that.
One of the things that this guy probably sent out as well is a promise of peace. Generally what I did is a courtesy letter, a notice of understanding and intent, and then the promise of peace. It shouldn't unnerve them at all. They should recognize that all they're doing is dealing with an adult human being who is recognizing his rights at law in this common law jurisdiction. And if I was a police officer, I would not take that as a threat at all.
If you were a police officer, would you be nervous about the Freeman?
Not at all. Not at all.
Is there any reason to fear the Freeman?
I don't think so. I think when, like, the true freemen who have gone through the entire process, they almost invariably end up at a point where they recognize the duty of compassion, the need for love, and to operate with the truth. What I tell people, the freemen, I say the first thing out of your mouth when you meet a police officer, you should say, "God's peace to you, peace officer. Are you claiming or seeking contract or conflict?" And if they give you demands, if they give you orders, you have the courts available, there's no need for violence, you accept whatever commands they're giving you, you tell them you're doing it under protest and duress so they can't find whether that you consented, go through it, and then talk to a judge.
Well, you've seen some of the videos. It does get a bit tense and a bit nasty.
What, with the police?
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, I've spoken with a number of police officers who very much like the freeman perspective because they don't like being policy enforcement and revenue collection officers for these corporations. And they're getting tired of it. They don't understand what's going on. Personally, I think peace is what it should be about. We should be motivated and guided by love, and we should be seeking peace and abundance, not trying to generate conflict with people.
And you said or at least I've read that you want to start, and I don't know how far you've come with this, with the Peace Officer Corps.
Yeah.
What is that?
If you look at the Criminal Code of Canada, a peace officer is anyone hired to preserve and maintain the public peace. So what we do is we just hire each other as peace officers, and then when we go out and we monitor the police and their actions, we're not talking that way, we're a militia and we're coming out with arms. What we do is we come out with a badge and we come out clearly identified as peace officers so that this way they're not scared of us. They recognize that we too have accepted a duty to peace, and then we film them and their actions for use in court later if necessary, so that they can't come up and say, "Stop doing that, and if you don't, I'm arresting you for obstructing a peace officer." Then it's them obstructing the peace officer.
So there's a badge, right? And so does that mean if somebody is stopped at a traffic stop by a police officer, for example, how do the peace officers know to go there? Keep an eye on them. I mean, is there
we aren't set up to that regard yet. There's maybe a couple of hundred people out there who have made oath to preserve and maintain the peace. They're not doing it for mercenary purposes or anything like that. They just want a more peaceful country. And imagine if we had a country where every adult was in fact a sworn peace officer who promised to preserve and maintain the peace. From the police officer's perspective, they like it because they know that we're not a threat to them. If we do attack them, we're abandoning our peace officer status. So they feel kind of like we're children who have finally grown up.
So, I realize you're just in the beginning, so you're still in the training stage?
No, I'm a horrible administrator. So we need proper administration for it. We need civilian oversight, with an elected civilian oversight body. And it's not just a bunch of people saying, I'm a peace officer, do. There does need to be a certain amount of oversight in it. So what we're trying to do is establish an elected civilian oversight committee, and then small groups, small divisions, where it's just people in their own communities who accept the duty to preserve and maintain the public peace.
And will they be armed with anything?
Video cameras, notebooks and pens, identifying jackets, so that the cops know that we're not, there to harm them, that we're not there to obstruct them in their duties. But they also need to know that we too are peace officers, and in a court of law, if we go testify against them, we're going to be granted the same status that they have.
And it's just to monitor the police?
No, it's to preserve and maintain the public peace. I know that I've helped people, if they were having a conflict outside of a bar kind of thing, and I could go up and talk to them and help them preserve the peace. Primarily, I don't think any force of peace officers should identify any other one group and then pick on them like that. So I wouldn't agree with that. But that is where the biggest problems are. I mean, where G20, it just happened not too long ago. There was that poor case of Robert Trzynski, I believe his name is, in Vancouver, who got beat to death, essentially. These things should not be happening, and people are becoming aware that the country is slowly devolving into a police state where police officers claim the right to command you, even though you're not doing anything, and their only justification, I told you so.
So you think it is important that your peace officers watch police officers?
I think it's important that the public watch the police officers and monitor it. And I think that by operating with the status of peace officer, we enjoy a far greater degree of protection from them being able to beat us up and claim, oh, you're obstructing a peace officer, and then they arrest you merely for refusing to obey their orders.
So you see the threat from the police to the freemen as opposed to from the freemen to the police?
I see, no, I don't, that's a pretty broad statement, I mean, I've met some amazing police officers out there who love this country as much as I do, and they do care very deeply about justice and about helping people. So I certainly don't want to create divisiveness like that. In the Canadian Common Core of Peace Officers, that's all, even including existing police officers. And I would like to find some retired police officers to hold this up so that we do have a second civilian oversight of the existing police, which most Canadians agree we need.
Do you have any police officers who've signed up as peace officers?
Not that I know of yet, but I've got a couple of letters that I'm sending out to some retired people. I am meeting this week with a group of people, including retired police officers, some people who are accountants in the government, ex-military, who see the dangers facing this country and who want to find a lawful remedy against them. And they recognize that we do have the right to hire each other to preserve and maintain the peace, and that the accountant actually, who worked with the government, he acknowledged that our birth certificate does in fact evidence our share in this country, our ownership, and that there is accounts there that we can access for meeting these demands.
Okay, I'm just going to stop for 1 second. I don't want to get the sound.
It's getting noisy.
Okay, I'm just going to get a little bit closer. Sorry. Sorry. It's just,
No,
who knew, right? Who knew? It's a public space.
Get some good shots for B-roll.
Yeah,
that's all
that's
asking
right.
about it. Yeah.
The wages to keep them on a certain
Yeah, it's.
age.
Let me just.
They're not cooperating.
No,
We're not having
it's a little less.
It's their lunch.
Where you made the joke about you spoke to a man. You relate a story where you spoke to a man who said a cop came to him and said, I'm going to have to take this firearm away from you. And he said, that's okay, I've got 12 more or something.
No, and it wasn't the cop, it was a warden, what do they call him?
Parks warden, isn't it?
Yeah, parks warden.
And then the last line was, that's okay, keep coming. The last one,
The last one, all you're going to get are bullets. Now, again, I don't advocate that kind of thought process, but bear in mind, this man was using this. He wasn't hunting for sport. He was going out and he was hunting for sustenance for his entire village. There were old people there who he was feeding. So if the people in that government start overstepping their mandate and putting people in Canada in danger where they could die, at what point does it become okay for us to make a stand, and at what level? And this man, bear in mind, he wasn't a violent man. He was a very, very peaceful man. And he ended up finding his remedy with that, and they gave him back his firearms, and now they just leave him be when he's in the bush.
But you relayed that story, and people laugh and they applaud at that story. But the implication of that is you push me too much, and I will shoot you.
I hate to bring up, the Nazi Germany kind of thing, but if people stood then at the right time, they wouldn't have been dragged to those gas chambers. At some point, either we have to stand up or we don't. And if we don't, we end up getting pushed until we lose all of the rights that our forefathers fought, killed, and died for. Now, I'm not saying that we pick up arms and go out there and use them. I'm saying that there is a path where that is completely unnecessary.
But are you also saying that it's not out of the question that could happen? And that you think it's within your rights?
Historically, I think you would be blind if you didn't think that that's exactly what happens when you push any people too far. When the people in power start treading on the little guy, eventually the little guy fights back one way or another. The free man movement is about standing up and avoiding that by using words and making claims and filling our hearts with love and peace. It is not about picking up guns and going and bringing battle in a civil war.
But you have that as a remedy.
No,
You say again. Help me understand this.
all I did was recount a story. I don't know that I would have responded in that manner. I probably would have said, well, I've got more at home and I'm going to go and take you to court, or go figure it out in court. This was a guy, and bear in mind, he didn't know much about the free man movement, and he was angry and frustrated at the level of control that these people in the government were arbitrarily enforcing on him, taking his property and endangering his life and the life of his village.
You can understand how some people would interpret that as a threat.
I think if they were to interpret that, probably. I mean, if someone said, yeah, you take all my guns until the last one, then all you're going to get is bullets, that's pretty much clearly a threat. But it also calls for the guy who's taking the guns to task, because he's still got 12 other guns to go, he should go and check whether or not it is in fact within his mandate to stop people from hunting for sustenance. And he never had that right. He overstepped his bounds.
So here's what I want to understand from you. We talked about this earlier, about the difference between sovereigns and freemen. What is the fundamental difference between the movement here and the movement in the United States? Because some of the language is similar.
I think we're far more peacefully oriented. We don't have the gun culture that they have down there. And we rely on words and the law and the rights that are available to us, which most people seem ignorant of. And we're simply exercising those within a context that most people look at us and go, you can't do that, and why not? And
What bothers you about the movement in the States?
it's me, and it's kind of violent from what I sensed. And bear in mind, I'm not down there. Personally, I don't have a gun. I have no desire to have a gun. Yes, I was hunting for sustenance. And I would be very, very hard-pressed to use a gun against anyone when all I have to do is submit under protest and duress and talk to a judge.
When you say talk to a judge, is it a remedy? And I've heard people talk about this before. You can take something to task legally. You can sue them.
We can sue them. We also have the power to swear out private informations, which will result in criminal charges being laid against the police officers.
Something.
You go to a judge, you have your affidavit of an occurrence of what happened, you have a thing that's called an information. You talk to the judge, it's just you and him, and if he feels that a crime has been committed, he is duty-bound to swear out a warrant for the arrest of that party. Now, right now, if you have a problem, you go to the police, they investigate, and then if they feel there's need for it, they suggest to the Crown Prosecutor, and then it's the Crown Prosecutor doing that. But what do you do when it's the police who are engaging in these unlawful actions? They aren't investigating themselves, and the Crown Prosecutor isn't going to do it. So luckily in common law, we all have the power just to go before a judge without any appointment or anything, to swear out an information, tell him what's going on, and if he feels that that guy, regardless of his police officer status, committed a crime, he will sign a warrant. And then if it was the Canadian Common Core peace officers doing that, once we have that signed warrant in hand, then we go to that cop's boss and we say, I've got a warrant for his arrest. Are you going to do it or am I? And his boss will do it every time.
And what about the suits? What can you sue somebody for?
Again, I'm not a
Have you-
lawyer, so I
have you
can't
ever done
can't give legal advice. I haven't. Generally, what I try to do before I run to court for adjudication, I use discussion and negotiation, and I try to find the common ground where we can find some form of peace, some form of resolution that doesn't require the adjudication. And the times where I was in a position where I could have run to court and sued, I found that discussing these issues with people, just as we're doing now, it settled the issue, and you can find their common ground, and there's no need for conflict. Court is a place for people with conflict. Adults should be able to settle their issues without, running to court.
I ask about that because, when you read about it, I keep reading this phrase over and over again. I'm sure you've heard it, paper terrorism. There is a perception that Freemen are engaged in paper terrorism.
I think that is such a perversion of the word terrorist. I mean, if all we're doing is serving notices, inviting discussion, making claims, and you're calling that terrorism, that's ludicrous. That's an abuse of that word. There are people who, like in the States, being motivated apparently just by money, have placed liens on people's properties. I don't suggest people do that. I mean, you need a court judgment in order to before you do that. And some people, they come out, they're so focused on winning a conflict that they lose sight of the tools available to us to avoid the conflict and find resolution without it.
So that sounds tricky for you because what I think you're saying is that, this is, the ideology is there, but it's not a unified movement in the sense that there are rules and protocols and whatnot.
No.
So some people interpret it one way and some people interpret it another way. It must be hard to sort of keep a handle on the reputation of the movement. When some people take it in one direction versus another.
Yeah, and the thing is, when the one bad guy gets a lot of press, and then everyone gets labeled as that, but what you don't see are the hundreds and hundreds of people who haven't done that, who are using, love. For the most part, people are looking in their hearts, they're finding love and compassion and truth, and then they look at these body of words, which is rapidly growing. We struggle under a body of words greater than the people in Soviet Russia ever had to contend with. And you don't find compassion in there anywhere. You don't find the word love in there. You find very little truth. And people are getting tired of that.
There are, sorry, I strayed a little bit, but back to the States conversation you're having. There are people in the United States who come here to train police officers on how to handle an encounter. And they say that there is danger here. They have not seen a level of violence here that they've seen in the United States, but they believe that there is the potential for great danger. What do you say to that?
I say they should operate within their mandate and follow the law, and there would be no danger. Because any danger that they might contend with is likely going to be a result of them overstepping their own mandate, their bounds of the law. And if they don't do that, there is no danger, because all we're doing is exercising our rights.
So is it overstepping the law then? I just understand if a police officer pulls somebody over and says, can I see your license and registration? And gets handed a piece of paper from someone saying, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. And the police officer says, that's it. You don't have a proper license plate, or you're speeding or whatever, I'm taking you in. Is that a situation that could lead to danger?
When people go through this process, it's almost like the 5 stages of grief. The first one is they reject it. The second one, they get angry, and then they start accepting and realizing that our enemies are not the police, it's not the government, it's fear, anger, and shame in our own hearts. So once they address that, then they get to the point where they would likely be less of a danger to that police officer by identifying himself as a peace-loving freeman than some other guy who has no idea what the law is. It's less random with a freeman. They know what to expect. They're going to get a document. The guy's going to say, under protest and duress, I submit, I do not consent to this. Yes, okay, you can do the, you've got the gun, I don't, and I don't want you to use it, and we both want to go home safe and sound together. So I think if I was a police officer and I truly understood what the free man movement was about, I would be supporting it, because it means they get to deal with more mature people who are more peace-loving and less of an unknown.
Do you counsel people who talk about these traffic stops and realize you're not a lawyer and no one suggests that you suggest you are, but do you counsel people to cool it sometimes at these traffic stops and not get so hot-headed? Because again, we post in the video when people use it.
Yeah, what I tell people is that, and I came very close to becoming a police officer myself, and I've got a number of friends are. Their biggest concern is in fact getting home safe. Their second biggest concern is whether or not we're going to be treated with the dignity and the respect that we all deserve. And if we want that in return, we've got to give it to them first. So ideally, they should, what I suggest to people is that when they get stopped, they say to the cop, the officer, God's peace to you, good sir. Are you claiming or seeking contract or conflict? Well, it has to be one or the other. And if he's a peace officer, he can't be seeking conflict. And if he's claiming that there is contract, then it's up to him to produce it, not us.
Two things.
Getting loud.
It's getting loud, so I'd like to talk for a lot longer. I have to cut this short before they've encroached on the space and they're sitting over here. So to that end, I want to ask you, because the word that you said, I mean, you used two words a lot, peace and freedom. I think we'd agree.
I sound like a hippie.
No. I think we'd agree you use that. But here again is where I want to clarify this, because if I look on some of the websites and see some of your writings, help you understand this, because this is a letter that you wrote, so I understand that. Police officer pulled you down. You get hit, I mean, very dearly indeed.
Well, when you take someone who has a career like a police officer, and you go in and you bring criminal charges to bear against them, and you succeed in bringing those criminal charges, they end up losing their career. I think that's a very dear payment.
Losing your career is one thing, but you can be lawfully shot and killed. Is that not threatening a cop?
If just because a cop is wearing a uniform doesn't mean they are incapable of breaking the law or engaging in actions which are clearly threatening to our very way of life. And what I am doing here is giving them warning that this is what could happen if they don't actively learn the law better and start operating within their mandates.
How can you justify saying to someone, you could be lawfully shot?
The cops say it to people in Canada all the time. Well, I'm not a cop, but that doesn't mean that they have greater powers. They're still, well, they do have greater powers, but it doesn't mean that they are above the law. The law allows us, whether or not people like it or not, to defend ourselves against unlawful actions that could take my life or take the life of someone else. Sometimes in order to get people to take you seriously, if they think that they're totally in charge and that they have all the power in the world, you have to let them know, listen, you're wrong. You don't have as much power as you think. We do have the power as well, and this could happen. We do have the power to defend ourselves against criminals. And even if the cop is the criminal is a cop, doesn't mean that we don't have that power.
But you can appreciate, or tell me if you can, someone might read this and feel extremely threatened.
And what I'm trying to warn them against here and elsewhere is that when you have the power structure coming down on people who are exercising and learning their rights, they're coming to the fact that this is a fundamental truth. We do have the power to defend our property, and we would be within the law to defend that property use according to Section 39. I mean, all I'm doing is referencing the Criminal Code of Canada and showing them what that criminal code says. I'm not saying that you should feel threatened that this is happening. I'm certainly not trying to manifest that. But they should be aware that when they go up and they exercise their authority with their hand on their gun and they make other people fearful of their gun, this is the kind of thing that could devolve into a violent confrontation, and it should be avoided. So what I'm trying to do here is not threaten them with shooting them and killing them, nor trying to espouse to others that they should. I'm trying to get the police officers to recognize there are limits to their authority under the law, under the Criminal Code of Canada, and that they should operate with respect to the Criminal Code of Canada.
So you're not a dangerous guy.
I'm a sweetheart. Of course I'm not a dangerous guy. I believe very strongly in compassion. When I look in my heart, the duty that I see, the fundamental duty, is one of compassion. I love my country. I love the law. I love justice. I believe very strongly in the rights and the freedoms that we have. But, I mean, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but there's no corresponding list of our duties and obligations. And I'm unaware of any right that doesn't have corresponding duties and obligations.
The future could be a little bit 5 years down the road. Where do you see this country, and where do you see this movement?
Well, in order to express that, I'd like to share with you the 5 things that I see. The problems that we have in our country are basically, I came up with the address mostly because I only had that many fingers on one hand. One, people need to grow up. We need to operate with a greater degree of maturity, with a greater eye towards human dignity. We have to stop dividing ourselves based on the color of our skin, our eye color, or the color of our socks, or even our political ideologies. It's silly that we divide ourselves like that. We have to recognize that we are responsible for the actions that our representative governments take, and we have to empower ourselves over them. The other problem that I see is that our form of government is archaic. It is so old. I believe very strongly in democracy, but what we have now is a democracy. And we now have the tools available for good direct democracy, where we don't have to elect people every 4 years who we know are just lying to us to get into power and then do whatever they want anyways. Our form of government is not working anymore. People are very unhappy with it. The other thing is the courts. What I see happening is we're going to get direct democracy happening with a People's Congress, essentially a People's Congress, where just about any issue could be deliberated and determined and decided by the populace and not our representatives. We then need courts, maybe not new courts, but we need courts where only people have a voice, no corporations. If you want justice, you need to have truth. And if you allow fictions in your courts, truth has gone out the other door. So we need courts within which only people are heard and everyone is held accountable for their actions. We need our peace officers to recognize that their duty is to peace, not to enforce policies, not to collect revenue. First and foremost, it should be peace. And secondly, we need to figure out how to put our money in circulation without interest attached. So what I see coming is either a civil war where we end up with guys with guns on the street trying to enforce their will upon us because we're questioning it. And I see them building, spending $9 billion on new prisons because there's, unreported crime, when actually what they're going to be doing is just locking up dissidents. Or I see something amazing coming where we do have the tools available to create a Canada which is off the chart amazing, where it's peace and abundance and people are working together to bring dignity to the world.
Now, this is what you're talking about. What you're saying earlier is that the people connecting via the internet is really a really important unifier. Is there a physical space that people inhabit who believe in the movement?
Yeah, there's all across Canada, all across the world. People are gathering in various coffee shops and gathering places and having seminars and talks and sharing information and talking about this. We don't have like a hall or anything. We don't have like Masonic halls or anything.
Do you have land?
I have land out in New Brunswick that is being held for me under trust. And I'm just going to be building a little cabin there so I can farm myself. Well, there'd be a small eco-village kind of thing. There's a number of eco-villages popping up all over the place where people are working together, where even if they don't have money, they have the tools, they have the know-how, they have the desire so that they could get through any economic crunch that comes. Because you look at the Amish, I mean, if the poo really hits the fan, they're well set. I mean, the meek do inherit the earth in that regard. And what we're trying to do is create smaller communities where we have greater say, and people are free to do pretty much whatever they want, provided they're not harming another human being, damaging property, or using fraud or mischief in their contracts.
Is land important to you? Like, is that a fundamental tenet?
I think land is important to people. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is. You need food, and guess where that comes from?
But I mean, in the sense of, in the same way that the numbers speak to money's owed. Do you, within Freeman philosophy, is there a belief that land is owed?
There is a belief not that land is owed, but that it is being held by the Crown in trust, and that we do have a right to claim it, not to take it, sell it, flip it, make money, but to steward it. And that we have a duty to the earth to steward it for future generations, and that means not letting the corporations and raping the land essentially and tearing it up and leaving behind nothing but clear cuts and poison and you know, so it's not that we claim the land for ourselves, but that we claim it for future generations, and we recognize a duty to steward it properly.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think is important that people need to know?
Well, I'd really like all the police officers out there to recognize that we are not a threat, we're not a danger, and that the true free men out there are people who want to do better for our country, and that for the most part, as long as they're operating within the bounds of the law, so are we. And even if they don't, then we still do operate within the bounds of the law.
You said the true freemen, though. Like, are you worried at all about people who maybe co-opt the philosophy and?
Some people, they come into this information and they have yet to develop the necessary psychological outlook. It is potentially dangerous information, and they think that they can do anything and that they're above the law. And I'm hopeful that I don't know, there's nothing I can do about it. I wish there was. I can't vet people and say, you can have this information, you can't. It's out there now. The seeds have been planted. And for the most part, I think that what they'll find is it's kind of like they're the babysitter, and now the people are growing up and saying, I don't need your babysitter anymore. And that's when the conflict comes, when the babysitter tries to argue and say, no, you can't. You know, because who am I going to babysit then? That's where I see the problems coming, is from them holding too strongly to the idea that we need to be governed. People are governing themselves properly. We don't need to be told exactly, you know, how to operate. If we're operating within our community standards, we're not hurting anyone. I do have a couple of questions
Sure.
for you. If there are a couple of countries in Africa, two neighboring countries, and then they announced to the world that they were getting rid of the border between them and creating a common perimeter for the purpose of security and economics, and that their security forces would be operating here and theirs over here, wouldn't it be obvious to you that they're actually creating a new country and merging their two old countries into one? It would become obvious, would it not?
But what are you saying?
I'm saying
What's
that
your analogy?
that's what's happening with Canada and the US, is that the people in power are, to me it appears, to be selling us out, and they're trying to create one giant country by getting rid of the border between us, creating a common security perimeter, and then amalgamating the security forces within the two. You end up with a de facto new country. It's not two separate countries at that point, because that which defines a separate country is now defining one mass.
Following that logic, then, would it not make? You talk about the differences between freemen and the sovereigns in the United States, but following that logic, it would sound like the interest is in bridging a connection between the freemen and the sovereigns. If you believe something very similar,
I don't really like the term sovereign so much. So
they don't like freemen either. So
yeah,
you know,
the term sovereign to me is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, it's, if you're a sovereign without any subjects whatsoever, and you don't have anyone to
Right.
to control, I mean, you're.
but if don't call them that then. Just following your analogy again, if your sense is that the Canadian and American governments are trying to merge as one entity and erase the border, does it not follow that the Canadian freemen and those in the United States who believe the same things would you like to see them joining up to combat that? Is that what you're saying?
When viewed from space, the Earth has no borders. And I think the people itself are naturally, eventually, we're all going to be operating as some form of cohesive group because these borders make very little sense, really. But what I don't want to see is those borders being eroded and then the power given to a very small group of bankers who have all of the control, and then we're all just under a one world government where we have so little control. That's what I don't want to see.
Is there anything else you think we should know?
Well, the other thing I was going to ask, well, I don't know, but for this camera, and to ask you, if some guy came to you and claimed the right to force you to live your life according to his own morals and ethics, and threaten to throw you in jail if you failed to do so, you would probably rightfully consider him to be insane. And yet, it seems to me that when someone's doing this to the whole country, no one's questioning his sanity at all.
And that's how you see what's happening?
Yeah, I think the people in power, I think if Canada was a ship, it's been hijacked. It's been hijacked by corporations who are only after profit. They want our resources, and they have lost sight of what it means to be Canadian.
And do you see yourself and others in a position to take that back?
I don't know that I see myself in a position to do that, but I do believe that we can plant some seeds that would make them doing that extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, and provided we do grow spiritually, consciously, and we become aware of what's going on, then yes, we can fix it.
Is there anything, Dan or Leanne or my friend, that you want to ask?
Nope.
No, you're okay? You're okay?
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time. And what's with like the
And now they're
sound?
gone.
Of course.
Do you want to grab those tight shots while we're still here,
Oh, I'm looking at
if you don't mind?
And the last thing is your letter.
This right here, what I wanted to do is to bring their attention to the powers available to us under Section 39 of the Criminal Code, so that they would not act with complete disregard to it, because there is danger to them if they do.
Sending that letter to a cop.
It was ballsy, I know, but I mean, I got to get their attention, and they have to recognize that they're our servants. We have the power here. I certainly hope that they never get shot. I don't want to see any bloodshed. I certainly don't want to see bloodshed as a result of the words I've spoken.
Thank you. That's a good point.